Thank you to everyone who wrote stories, who submitted stories, who's here to tell stories. Thank you to the Vermont Arts Council for a $4,000 grant that helped make this possible. And thanks to 802 Credit Union, who helped to pay for the printing of the anthologies. There's one anthology free per person. I'm Barbara Ball. I'm the director of the Windsor Library.
All right. We're going to go, as Barbara said, we're going to go in chronological order, mostly. We're going to start in the 1930s. And the reason we're doing it that way is it's kind of fascinating to see how all these different stories merge over time. And for some of us weren't alive in the 1930s. Some of us were not here in Windsor in the 50s or the 60s or 70s. We were somewhere else, but our story was coming along and eventually ending up here in this room together. So it's kind of like all these tributaries into one river. It's kind of the way I see it. So we're going to start with Diane Folds. And like I said, this is in the 30s.
So my story is about Marcia Davenport, which most of you probably have never heard of. She was a novelist who was really a household name in the first half of the 20th century. She was a New Yorker. She was of European stock. Her mother was a famous, like a Maria Callas, a famous opera star who had been born in Romania and emigrated, and they lived right near Carnegie Hall. So she'd go to school and bring her homework and sit, and while her mother rehearsed with Arturo Toscanini, she would be reading her school books. So by the time she grew up, they started thinking, well, you know, Marcia, do you have our musical? They expected her to follow, you know, in the tradition, but she had no musical ability, zilch. And she wasn't beautiful like her mother, but she observed, she was watching everything, and she sort of felt stuff through her bones. So she read books, as many books as she could. So obviously she turns into a writer. And the first book she wanted to write was Mozart. All she could think of was music. So she was already writing for the New Yorker. So we knew she had talent. She went to meet Max Perkins, our own Max Perkins, in New York City. You know, she could walk over to his office at Scribner's, and she got into him because she knew sort of somebody who knew him, and walked into his office and said, you know, it's like this. I'm working for the New Yorker. I'm a writer. I want to write this history, this biography of Mozart, but I kind of can't quit my job because I'm going to have to travel. I'm going to have to go to Europe and do a lot of research. So I thought I'd ask, I mean, if I wrote this, would you publish it? And then he said, well, why do you want to write this? So she hummed and hawed a little bit and told him. And he said, okay, write it. We'll publish it. Wow. And she described that years later as a thunderclap. Huh? Because, and it just propelled her, because that was the only time she ever called him Mr. Perkins. They just became friends. And she went off, she married a guy who was, his father was the vice president of Bethlehem Steel. So after she finished her book about Mozart, which was a huge success, the first time a biography of Mozart had ever been published in English in the United States, and it was still in print until very recently. It may still be in print. Maxwell Perkins kept saying, okay, now what's your next book? And I won't go into all of the books, but the main thing I want to say is that when she moved to Windsor, it was because of her husband. He was sort of, he did everything 100 50%, and he wanted to get way away. So it was not that she wanted to be near Maxwell Perkins. She saw him all winter anyway, but he had this wild idea, and you'll see when you read the story that it was crazy, and there were no highways. They had to get out of the city because it was too hot. There was no air conditioning in those days, but the place was a wreck, and they just didn't have time. They only had like a weekend, then they had to go back. And because of the books that Maxwell Perkins urged her to write, urging that she base her stories on her own life. And she really didn't want to do that. It was an invasion of privacy, but gradually she followed his advice because she knew he was right. It led her from music to Czechoslovakia, strangely, because Mozart did a lot of his conducting and concerts in Prague. That's where he was most popular, not in Vienna where he wanted to be, but in Prague. And so having learned that, her next book was about the steel industry, surprise, surprise, and about the Czech immigrants who came to work in it. And each of her books was more and more about Czechoslovakia. In fact, the three loves of her life were music, Prague, and forgot the third. Okay. Anyway, I'll try to make this shorter. The reason that she's so important for literature is that she was a witness to the Second World War. And by the time she was in Windsor, she was meeting with friends, who all they could talk about was World War II, and the fact that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was isolationist. He didn't want to enter the war until Pearl Harbor in 1941. And so they actually had to leave Windsor and had to sort of give up trying to start a farm here because they didn't have time. Wendell Willkie, who did want to enter the war and help Britain, was running in the presidential race against FDR. And so her husband, Russell Davenport, became his campaign manager, and both of them were writing speeches for him and trying to help, especially the Czechs who had been sold out in the Munich Agreement and were now occupied by Nazi forces. So it ended very tragically because she, as a witness after the war, went to Czechoslovakia and watched gradually as the Russians infiltrated and eventually took over the democratic government that the foreign minister, the democratic government that had just been founded in 1918, and she had started a very close relationship with the founding father's son, who was the foreign minister. He was the last person to fight before the Russians took over, and they murdered him. And so she left and went back, and all of her books, her last book was an autobiography. So if you look at her 7 books, each of them goes a little bit more personal, always thinking about Max Perkins and what he told her. It's very poignant, and her books are good. 2 of her novels are movies. Joe and I watched one of them, the one about the steel plant, and it was pretty good considering that it was so old. Gregory Peck and Greer Garson, The Valley of Decision, it was called. Okay, I'm going to end by just showing you. This was first edition of her Mozart book, just to show you how different the covers were in those days. I read it. Very, very good. I'd never really understood music and what draws people to it, classical opera, until I read that. And I also want to say that there are 3 of her books in our library. And what's so sweet is that these were obtained years ago when they came out. And way at the back, this one, East Side, West Side, which was her first sort of self-portrait, very difficult for her to write. Max Perkins died before she finished it, so she dedicated in memory of Maxwell Everett Perkins, with gratitude for this and all his work, with love and sorrow. And then on the back, in pencil, very thin, you can barely read it, it says, Davenport, Marcia, East Side, West Side, and then in parentheses, Windsor author.
All right, we're going to fast forward to the 60s. And Bess Klassen-Landis in the 60s had no idea she would end up in Windsor, Vermont. But she did. And she could share something from her childhood in the 60s.
So I wrote a song about the tornado I went through in 1965. It was called the Palm Sunday Tornado, and this was in Elkhart, Indiana. It started out as a really balmy day. It was April 11th, and in April, you don't expect to be wearing cutoffs, going barefoot, and just running through the woods. But that's the kind of day it was, sort of a yellowish sky. And then around supper time, just as we're all getting ready to have our popcorn and watch Walt Disney, there's an all clear. Oh, there were tornado warnings, and then there was an all clear. So we're going to come upstairs and have our food. But a neighbor girl runs to our house and said, there's dead mice falling out of the sky at our house. And anyhow, Dad invites her in, and she's with us for a little bit, and he decides he's going to drive her home rather than have her walk, even though this is out in the country and there's just a vacant lot between our two houses. Anyhow, when he backs out, he sees the tornado, which at that point is 2 miles wide on the ground, and it's about half a mile away. So we all know what to do when he comes in and yells, tornado! So we know where the southwest corner is in the house, and we all go down there, and there are candles there, and we squeeze between the wall and a double bed that's there, and our parents kind of land on top of us, kind of protecting us. And what we hear are hundreds of trains. That's what it sounds like, going over our heads. The ceiling above us remains. There's a little basement window that a pine tree comes in. But as a 4th grader, I'm not imagining that our house is being demolished. You know, I hear all this, but really, to think our stone house is being taken away, you just don't imagine that. So when it's finally over and we walk to the stairway to look up, and you see just a stormy sky. And eventually we found shelter, a very frightened couple out on a date, not knowing where they could turn because there were multiple tornadoes in the county that night, took us someplace where we could be taken care of that night. Anyhow, a few years back, I wrote a song about the tornado, and I believe Barbara is going to play that for you.
There was a time we girls, we lived at home together, and our cousins lived just down the road, filling the oaks and Memories mixed with the dark clouds that did gather, warm yellow sky, so still for an April day. Seems out of nowhere a tornado took each brick from its mortar, thunderous roaring railed o'er where we lay. Don't turn your eyes from me, I am still here. Trees will grow again. Let your questions turn to music, voices fill the air. Out of the wreckage we walked, our family still together. We found shelter that night by and by. But in the morning we heard that others weren't as lucky. 60 died across the county wide. Wearing our only clothes, the clothes upon our backs. That day we were barefoot that balmy afternoon. When I returned to school, Michael, Leslie, and Steve were dead. My fourth grade would never be the same. Don't turn your eyes from me, I am still here. Fear will recede in time. Let your questions turn to music, voices fill the air. We walked through church basements, piled high with offerings of food, warm clothes, and homemade quilts. We were told to take whatever we needed till our lives could finally be rebuilt. For 2 years we pulled metal, plastic, glass, and wood, have buried like missiles in the yard. And we planted more pines and built our house back up again. But for kindness it would have been too hard. Don't turn your eyes from me, I am still here. Gratitude will be thy vow. Let your questions turn to music, voices fill the air. There was a time we girls, we lived at home together, and our cousins lived just down the road, filling the oaks and pines with forts and games and laughter, playing at night till we were called home.
Okay, we're now moving into the 70s, into the 80s. We're going to start with Paul Balaski. He's going to read a story written by his sister, Jean.
I'm going to read a story that my sister wrote in 2010 with the help of Marv Klassen-Landis when she was receiving treatments for recurrence of breast cancer. And unfortunately, she succumbed to that 2 years later at the age of 58. But all of us grew up in Windsor. But this isn't first person, but she wrote it. Growing up in Windsor, God, is that you? When I was in my 20s, I wanted to go parachuting. Dad was a paratrooper and used to tell me stories, so I wanted to try it. I went down to Orange, Massachusetts with a friend. We made 2 jumps together. There were 8 guys and myself and the jump master. My friend went first. I heard him screaming all the way down. I leaned out and looked down to see what was happening to him. Of course, the air pressure sucked me right out. As I was falling, everything seemed to slow down. I was looking around at the beautiful fall foliage. It was like paradise. I heard a voice. "Gene, are you there? Gene, are you there?" I looked around and said, "God, is that you?" There was no answer. Then it dawned on me. I was parachuting, and the voice was an instructor. It was coming from the radio on top of the rescue chute, reserve chute, I'm sorry. The voice came again. "Right riser, right riser." An instructor on the ground was telling me to pull on the toggle attached to the right riser to guide me in. I had a great landing. My friend landed in the trees, but still wanted to go up again. My jump didn't go as well. I got into an air pocket and I got whipped around. I glanced up and saw the jump master's worried face. And then I remembered the instructor saying that in situations like that, to lift our heads and look up. I did so, and that flattened me out and stopped my tumbling. On my second landing, the wind was behind me, so I came in fast at an angle. And when I hit the ground, my jump boots went up to my ears. About 6 months later, I heard my instructor had gotten the lines of his main chute and reserve chute tangled so that they couldn't open, and he was unable to cut them free before he hit the ground. At that point, I decided I probably wasn't going to be using the jump logbook I had bought the first time. I knew enough that my curiosity had been satisfied, and I didn't need to do it again. The scary thing is I went on to become a guidance counselor to guide children in making good choices. I had done all those bizarre things. Do as I say, not as I do.
All right, I'm going to start with a piece written by Peter Levesque. And I hope you enjoy this as much as I do. It's called The Paratrooper in Kennedy Pond. Got your interest? Yeah. When I was growing up and all through high school, the firehouse was located on Main Street, across from Old South Church. It was largely volunteer back then. All active volunteer firemen had plectron units at home. Those were emergency alerting radio receivers that signaled a code that would direct them to the location of a fire. The firehouse had a klaxon horn mounted to the roof that could be heard all over town. Its distinctive blasting sound would count out a coded number. Most everyone in town had a manila card that listed all the codes with their relative geographic location. So, if there was something happening in town, all one needed to do was get the code, then look at the card to know precisely where the commotion was located. Of course, as kids, we gleefully awaited that klaxon horn, knowing that there was some excitement afoot in our otherwise humdrum town. A very good friend of mine and I routinely engaged in, let us say, a respectable level of shenanigans. We were eagerly anticipating that old fire whistle going off. Back then, everybody seemed to be seeing and talking about UFOs. So one day, while perusing my latest copy of the Edmund Scientific Catalog, I noticed they were selling wonderful hot air balloons that were shaped like flying saucers. Of course, I instantly ordered one. Upon its arrival, I discovered it was made up of several gores, triangular pieces of tissue paper that, when glued together with some mucilage, formed a wonderful flying saucer shape. These paper gores were quite similar to the way a globe is made. Anyway, after laying some newspapers on my family's dining room table, we set about gluing all these multiple pieces together. Finally, we produced a rather interesting object that did indeed bear some resemblance to a flying saucer. Although the tissue paper was white, Edmund had also included some darker colored portals to be cemented. Right on time. To be cemented on whenever one chose, wherever one chose. But we decided they looked too obviously fake, so they were not included in the final assembly. The finishing touch was to cement a wire hoop around the 1.5-foot circular opening at the bottom of the balloon. We chose a nice day to launch it from the little field that my father owned at the end of Kinnery Street. We lit a bit of gasoline in the bottom of a pail. Then we carefully held the balloon's opening over the pail. That thing inflated very quickly. It inflated so much that it was attempting to tear the wire ring right out of its bottom. When we finally let it go, it shot up into the air and took off. It was out of sight within 30 seconds. Well, there was no denying that we'd had a very successful launch. But now the question remained. Where the heck had the thing gone? We jumped into the car and headed off in that general direction, looking all over the place, including all the treetops, but no success at all. After giving up, we headed down to Petco to get some sodas. As we were getting out of the car, we heard the fire whistle blowing. Not being ones to risk missing any excitement, we quickly got back into the car and headed toward the fire station. The truck's sirens blaring were just leaving. We chased them down Route 5, then up Union Street. When we got to the foot of Cherry Street, not only was the fire truck there, but also the police and a number of spectators on foot and in cars that seemed to be pulled off everywhere. We parked and walked over the swimming area of Kennedy Pond, where everybody seemed to be staring out across the water. About halfway out, we saw a couple of guys in a rowboat. One guy was rowing frantically, while the other was donning some skin diving equipment. We walked up to a fellow I knew who was standing there, and I asked him, "What's going on anyway?" He said, "It's unbelievable. Mrs. Kittredge, who had a house on Cherry Street with a commanding view of the entire pond, had called and reported that she had seen a paratrooper crash landing in the pond." A paratrooper! No kidding, I said, glancing out across the pond and seeing the remains of our UFO balloon slowly sinking out of sight. My friend and I grinned at each other, but said nothing. Just then, the men in the boat pulled up alongside the floating object. One man put the oar out and grabbed the thing, which, of course, was nothing more than a bunch of saturated tissue paper, clearly not the silk parachute he was anticipating. Nonetheless, the frogmen all suited up, dove in anyway, and swam around a while, but never did locate the poor, unfortunate paratrooper. My cohort and I quietly exited from the situation. We never mentioned it to anyone. until a great many years later. So to some, the incident remains a mystery. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And he has several other awesome stories in the anthology, which you want to read cover to cover. And I'm going to read one more by request. This is by Dale Emery.
He's also here in the back.
Dale's here. Thanks, Dale. And feel free to correct me. All right. I'm going to write briefly. It's called Stonework by Dale Emery. I'm going to write briefly how I got started doing stonework for the last 20 plus years. I kind of started in grade school in Ascutney, Vermont, at age 12 in art class. Since me and my younger brother were making maple syrup at the time, I decided to draw a picture of a sugar house, trees, and stone walls. We were all given charcoal pencils to draw a picture. Mrs. Patterson was the teacher. She received our drawings and was very impressed with my stone wall drawing. As life went on, I got myself into doing masonry construction work for Brown Construction in Perkinsville, Vermont. I started working for them in spring of 1984. Ron Brown was president. We built very fancy fireplaces, chimneys, arches, etc. with brick and stone. We worked all year around back then with a great share of mixing, cutting, constructing, scaffolding, and ladder work. We were working on Stratton Mountain at the time, High Meadow, I recall. It was spring of 1984, mud season. The crew was Richard Foster, the foreman, my teacher, a very smart man. Kim Porter was a mason, and Sean Millard and Greg Ballard, also on the crew. We finished the stone fireplace, so the boss asked me to take the leftover stones out of the building and discard them out back. I commenced with stacking them up like dominoes. When Kim Porter saw them, he asked me if I did this. Yes, I replied. So after laboring for 10 to 12 years, I finally got a chance to lay stone myself with some small guidance with mortar. Then the owner of the company asked if I'd be interested in repair and side work, fixing stone walls. He taught me the trade, bought me some tools. I was growing quickly and learning. There were some days the boss wasn't very happy with me taking on extra work. We worked this out together. A great share of my stone wall work is located at Town Farm Road in South Reading, Vermont, the Bartlett residence, and also the Didero residence. I became very well known for my work up there and in Perkinsville, Vermont. I learned mostly on my own and learned to work together with gravity and balance and not against them. Quite often paying very close attention to my fingertips, too. I learned always, thinking ahead frequently. Feel free to ask questions or advice on any Stonewall projects. And there are photos in the book. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, this isn't one of the stories in the book. But it's another animal story. Most of my stories are animal stories. It's about mice. We've all had experiences with them. So many years ago, when I first moved to New England, my son was just a baby. He was in his first year. And as many of you will know, I was very short on sleep, and I was really in the twilight zone. And he and I lived in a little upstairs apartment on a super busy road in Hadley, Massachusetts. It's like the throughway between Northampton and Amherst. So we were there, and I'd be nursing him kind of after my supper time, and in an altered state. And after a while, I started noticing, well, a mouse came out, and then maybe the next night a few more, and another night, why there was, dad and sis and uncle so and so and aunt, and I kind of slowly registered, and I was like, there's 5 of them, and I think I better do something. So I went downstairs the next day and talked to my landlady. She ran the jewelry shop, and her father was a wildlife biologist at UMass. So she had a Havahart traps. I think they were new then. So she got me a little Havahart, trap, and I started catching the mice. And it took about 3 days, and I caught all 5 of them over 3 days. And I had to decide where to take them so they wouldn't come back. So, of course, I took each one across the busy road. And then there was a big mega Catholic church there in the parking lot and everything. So behind that, and then to a railroad depot in Hadley, all the Polish farmers and the sawdust pile and the barns and everything. And so I looked around, no dogs, a nice barn, maybe some potatoes, And each one I dropped off in the back there. And then the day after all of this, the first night, no mice, about 2 or 3 in the morning, I was awakened by a sound like a locomotive. And it was like just right next to my bed in the bedroom, like a small bedroom. And there all 5 mice were, and they were just circling and circling and circling right next to my bed. That was a thrill. So the next day I went downstairs and talked to my landlady, whose father was a wildlife biologist, and he said that mice have a great sense of direction. And when they're uncertain as to where to go, they will circle until they have a feeling for it. And so what I had witnessed was the mice not only finding each other, over several days, but then when they came back, they're showing me how they got back. Somehow we were lost, and here we are again. So that was wonderful, and so I set about trapping them again, and they were very good. They went for the peanut butter one after the other, and I had to decide where to take them. And so this time I took them, I guess it was about 5 miles from where I was to someplace in Amherst. So I just drove all the way down there, and then I went up Amity Street, and the bottom of somewhere in Amity Street there was kind of like a little farm, and I really checked it out to see that there were no cats around. There was a nice dog out there. And so I just brought each one there, and they never came back, but some months later, maybe 4 or 5 months, my son's father and we decided to buy a house in Amherst on Amity Street. So I just thought, isn't that wonderful? Mice are sometimes called your like your homies, is what they would be called now, your household spirits. So I had taken them to where we would be going, and that's the end of that one. Yeah.
So this is the menorah comes to Windsor. It was early in December of 2000, and our family had been living in Windsor for a couple of years. I was driving down Main Street with my daughter Rachel. At the time, there was a big Christmas tree in the corner lot at State and Main, across the street from Tammy's Headlines. The town and the property owners put it up every year, and with a tree lighting ceremony and everything. As we drove by and looked at the beautifully decorated tree, Rachel piped up from her car seat behind me, "Daddy, there should be a Hanukkah menorah there next to the Christmas tree. Why isn't there a Hanukkah menorah?" I didn't really know how to answer. I allowed as how there probably should be one, and maybe the people in Windsor didn't know much about Hanukkah. "Well, there should be one," said Rachel. Later in the day, as I thought more about it, it seemed to make even more sense that there should be one. It didn't seem like it would be too difficult to reach back into my theater stagecraft and library crafts bag of tricks and make one in time for Hanukkah in a week or two. Plywood, 2x4s, and paints. That's all it took to make a passable-looking 6-foot-high menorah to stand up next to the Christmas tree on the corner. I called the town offices and got permission to stand it up next to the tree. The first year, it had wooden flames for candles. I attached one every night of Hanukkah, and Rachel and my wife Lori came with me, and we sang the Hanukkah Candles Prayer. Over the next few years, I refined and repainted the plywood menorah, including replacing the wooden flames with wired-in lights that gave off a wonderful holiday glow when they were all lit. Eventually, the Christmas tree and our menorah moved across the street to the Windsor Memorial Park for the holidays. And just when I was thinking that I needed to make an updated, better-made menorah, Windsor sculptor-artist Bill Ballantyne offered to make a more permanent metal one. This is the beautiful piece of art that stands next to the Christmas tree and the Kwanzaa Kirna that we now light every year during the holiday. The original plywood menorah is still in the rafters of my garage, waiting to be spruced up and repainted when needed again. Although the writing is faded, it still has an inscription on the back that I put there the first year and remember every year. For all those who celebrate Hanukkah in Windsor, especially Rachel, who noticed what was missing and asked to change it.
My apologies to anybody who's heard this story, and there are a few who have. This is for those who haven't. Why Windsor? This was a question I got from a number of friends when I told them I was moving to Windsor 20 years ago. One friend, who happens to be a Vermont state senator, proclaimed that I was the poster child for affordable housing in Woodstock, from where I was relocating. Granted, I was leaving a pretty swell situation of 10 years, living in a caretaker's house at the end of a dead-end dirt road in South Woodstock on 100 acres with 4 ponds, and landlords who spent most of their time in Connecticut and who, with exceeding generosity, charged me very little rent and asked very little of me in return. I paid $250 a month for 10 years for a 3-bedroom house and gardens. Yeah, it was crazy. Why Windsor indeed? Was I crazy? It was June 2004, and I was helping my friends Marv and Bess Klassen-Landis move from Heartland into their house on the corner of Lowell Street and Clough Avenue. Standing on their front porch, I looked across and down the street at a small house with white aluminum siding, a 2-car garage, and several very large maple trees in the yard. My childhood home was surrounded by big old maple trees. It looked welcoming. There was a car in the driveway. 2 people standing with me on the porch distinctly remember me saying that I was going to live in this small white house. I have no recollection of the statement. I wasn't even looking for a house. I had never owned a house. I couldn't afford a house. I was very happy where I was. After I left, my friends inquired about the property when they met the new next-door neighbors. The house was empty. The car in the driveway belonged to a neighbor. The elderly woman, Ida Gibson, who owned it and had spent 2 years at Mount Scottney Nursing Facility and had passed away the previous year. Her husband, Arthur Gibby, had passed away in the mid-1980s. They had no children. The house would be going on the market. My friends found out who the real estate agent would be. I called her office and was told that the house had been left to 2 nieces and that there was a waiting list of 8 people who had expressed interest in the house over the years. I thanked her, we said goodbye, and that was that, or so I thought. Marv said, call her back and put your name on the list. That seemed pointless to me. I called her back and told her I was interested. The summer passed, and I roamed the 100 acres, tended my flower gardens, and swam in the pond with a sandy beach. Near the end of August, the realtor called to say that my name had risen to the top of the list. My first and obvious question was, what's wrong with the house? Nothing, apparently. Some people on the list had died, some had moved away, and whoever was left thought the asking price was way too high for Windsor. Compared to prices I'd gazed at in my neighboring towns, it seemed quite reasonable, despite the fact that I hadn't really considered how I would pay for this house. I toured the inside and sat on the glass screen back porch with the realtor. I tried not to be too effusive about how much I liked the house, knowing that one should never base a large monetary investment on emotions. However, the old wavy glass porch windows on the porch, the maple trees, the beautiful fir floors, and the old enamel kitchen sink, like the one I grew up with, were drawing me in. I don't think I even realized at first that Kennedy Pond was a 30-second walk through the woods from the backyard. That was closer than the 5-minute walk to the South Woodstock Pond. I moved into the house after a large 50th birthday party celebration at a friend's house on November 30th, 2004. My first home ownership. Happy birthday to me. I held a yard sale in the spring of my first year. The late Joyce Pierce showed up. She had been a good friend of Ida Gibson's and said she was sure that I had found a very clean house when I moved in. Ida was a scrubber, she said. She also told me that Ida had invited her over for coffee one day when she was the treasurer of Old South Church. She said, we sat down in the kitchen and Ida said, all right, Joyce, I'm going to show you how to cook the books. I heard from my new neighbors, John and Debbie Brush, that the former generation of kids on the block knew to watch for Ida when she backed out of her driveway. She was apparently very short, didn't use her rear or side view mirrors, and tended to gun it straight from the garage to the street. We now have a new generation of kids in the hood, and I'm extremely careful backing out of the driveway. There are bikes, trikes, foot-powered go-karts, zipping scooters, strollers, and just plain foot traffic, all of which I relish as part of a vibrant, friendly community. Kay White lived across the street and was another friend of Ida's. When I had the arborvitae hedge pulled up from in front of my house, Kay told her granddaughter that I was ruining the yard. When I filled the space with perennials, we became friends. Debbie Brush caught on that I liked sweets. I used to find an occasional piece of blueberry or some other kind of cake on my back porch when I got home from work. One summer day, when I was working in my garden quite close to the Brush's house, I heard a window open. Number 26, your order's ready. I looked over to find Debbie holding a piece of homemade pie and ice cream on a plate for me. That happened more than once. I miss the Brushes. I served on the library board at one point with John Brush and Pamela Bagley, another neighbor. We called ourselves the Clough Dwellers, proud that our street was so represented. Around the corner on Lowell Street lives Dwight, whose last name I still don't know after 20 and a half years. Dwight owns several vintage cars, which he takes turns driving around the neighborhood and beyond. If only all drivers would drive as slowly as Dwight. I don't think he's ever exceeded 15 miles an hour. The Brushes sold their house a number of years ago and moved away. They could never be replicated, but they were replaced by the exuberant, colorful, and friendly Hebert family. Young Xavier visited me one afternoon on his tricycle as I was weeding my garden by the sidewalk. His mom called him home, to which he replied, "I'm going to hang with Ham for a while." When he was called the second time, he pedaled his tricycle up the sidewalk, leaving a trail of pee as he went. Not too long after that, his younger brother Dante appeared in my yard from behind his house. I was gardening again. He was probably 3 and naked as a jaybird. He was holding a very worn-out stuffed toy kitty. I said hi to him. He walked up to me, rested his kitty on my leg, and made a purring sound. One of his parents called to him, and he turned and disappeared behind their lilac bush. I will always remember those 2 gestures of acceptance by 2 small people. Xavier and Dante's father, Ryan, converted John Brush's woodworking shop into a sound studio where the small group of local guys gather to rehearse and play once a week. I call them the boys in the band. It's not necessarily my kind of music, but that doesn't decrease the enjoyment I get from knowing that a bunch of former Windsor school friends are still making music together and enjoying each other's company. By the way, that music studio, formerly a wood shop, was formerly the Gibsons' garage. When they decided to build a new garage, John Brush hired Miller Construction Crane to move the original one to his backyard. A moose passed through my backyard the first summer I lived here. I wasn't home, but a friend saw it and took a picture. Several years later, my friend Marv and I watched from a canoe as a bald eagle and an osprey fought over a fish in midair over Kennedy Pond. A pair of merlins built a nest behind my house 2 years ago, overlooking the pond. I assume that they fish, but they also pose a threat to all of our neighborhood songbirds. There's not much we can do except to watch as nature has its way, and nature abounds in Windsor. There have been bear and fox sightings in the neighborhood. Paradise Park and Lake Runnymede, along with the newly created Windsor grasslands, are considered to be some of the best birding locations in the state. I could conceivably walk from my back door to the top of Mount Ascutney, crossing only one 2-lane road. I can easily walk to the bank, the pharmacy, the post office, the grocery store, the library, several restaurants, and Mr. G's discount store. I can drive to St. Gaudens' summer Sunday afternoon concert in 10 minutes, and to the wonderful Top of the World in 15. Maple Creamies and a Dunkin's double burger are minutes away at Fraser's Place, and even White River Junction is a quick 20 minutes on I-91. Why Windsor? Because of everything mentioned above and more. Because the town has something amazing, historically relevant architecture. Because our schools are downtown. Most of our residents actually live here year-round. The lights in people's homes are on at night. The streets are full of young people. We live between and have access to Mount Ascutney and the Connecticut River. We have a public beach, a vibrant rec center, a wonderful library, a community garden, a dog park, and on and on. If my friends had not moved here almost 21 years ago, I probably would not be here. And I would not have discovered a place that is so near and yet so far. I'm grateful to them and grateful to all of the people I've met here for helping to create such a diverse and welcoming home. Why Windsor? Why not?
So I wrote a different story than the one I put in the anthology that I'm going to share today. I wanted sheep, dairy sheep. I had read most of a book about raising sheep a few years ago, but other than that, I didn't do any research or planning. The equation seemed simple and practical: wool, milk, and meat in exchange for grass. So when I saw East Frisian dairy ewes for sale on the listserv, I got excited and bought them. Never mind that I was still in escrow on my new home in Windsor. The seller housed them for me for a month until I was ready for them. And as soon as I filled the empty house with our boxes and placed our mattresses on the bedroom floors, my 2 dairy ewes arrived, Esther and Spotty. They came with an electric fence and charger, and I bought some buckets to haul water to them every day. My 7-year-old son would drape himself over them and lie down with them in the cool grass, cuddled up. Boxes still filling the house, I pivoted to building them a small barn off the back of the garage, while my son busied himself making hotels for woolly bear caterpillars, riding his bike, and giving me a hand when I called and asked him to hold the ladder or board or hand me a tool. Before long, the ewes had a nice barn to go to sleep in each night, and we all got ourselves settled in our new home. As the season began to turn, we filled the barn with square bales for the winter and found someone with an East Frisian ram named Kaz, who would stay with us for a month or 2 in the winter. Come spring, we would have lambs, and I would figure out how to milk a ewe. The first lambing went pretty smoothly. Esther had triplets unassisted, and one of Spotty's twins died for reasons we didn't fully understand. We knew that we would end up eating some of the lambs and discussed how we wanted to deal with this. Did we want to name the lambs lunch and dinner and try to keep from getting too attached? No way. We were already in love and named them all after flowers that year. Clover, Rose, and Iris, Jasmine, and little Aster, who died. We decided that by the time we ate them, we would know that they could not have lived better lives, and we would be grateful that we were not contributing to the suffering that characterizes the commercial animal industry. During the next 3 years, we learned not only that sheep milk is the sweetest, creamiest, most delicious milk of all, but also that my son has a food sensitivity to milk products. So he could not consume the gallons of fresh, nutritious milk, yogurt, and cheese filling our refrigerator. By the time we realized this, we were already in too deep. And my son cultivated heroic levels of willpower as he watched me consume epic proportions of our farm fresh dairy products while he was relegated to peanut butter and avocados. Dairy animals are different than other livestock. Because they give so much, they need some pampering. And due to the fact that triplets and quadruplets are common, East Frisians may just be the neediest dairy animals of all. My high-producing ewes were prone to parasites, rotting hooves, and nutritional deficits or imbalances. Early each morning, the ewes hollered loudly to be milked and grained, reunited with their lambs, and taken to the freshest pasture. Spring, summer, fall, and winter, our lives and routines revolved around caring for our sheep. And I can tell you that hand milking is the most intimate you will ever get with an animal. My ewes and I were connected so deeply that I have trouble describing it. And maybe because no one ever talks about this, it really began to sink in over time as I got closer to my ewes that they didn't want to be milked. And when it came time for butchering, the gratitude we felt for the delicious meat that nourished us all winter was profound enough that it eclipsed the sorrow and guilt we felt at first. Eventually, though, I had to face the reality that raising a small flock of dairy sheep was not only an endeavor that was questionable financially and ethically, but it also meant that my son was often playing second fiddle to the sheep. On top of all that, as a single mom, homeschooling and homesteading, I needed a break. And so with a very heavy heart, I sold our flock. Sweet Every and Nala, our pirate sheep. Iris and Rose, our milking ewes. And our lambs, Anubis, Pancake, and Bunny. Having shepherded them every day of their lives, I sobbed the heavy, salty waters of grief as I let them go, struck with the agony of deciding what to do with their lives based on my interests and not theirs. And then came time to reflect, to marvel at how our sheep became such an inseparable part of our lives. From waking in the morning to going to bed at night, the needs of our flock took center stage. Their well-being was our well-being. We had never lived on our Windsor property without them. Our homestead felt dead. Prior to Windsor, Vermont, we lived in the ancestral territory of the Klamath tribes in rural Northern California. There I lived and worked closely with the Karuk tribe for decades. The Karuk are the upriver people. They are the Save the World people. Every season of every year, they perform ceremonies to renew the world, to ask the salmon to return upriver and feed every living thing, to thank the salmon and honor all that makes life possible. The Karuk people know their survival is not possible without the river and the salmon. And having lived next to them, I thought I had come to know this truth as well. But it wasn't until my sheep were gone that my understanding sank deeper into the cells of my body, the cells that were once sheep and forbs, salmon, sunlight, and rain. We are the animals, and we are the land. There is no separation, no us and them, no you or it. Every species is truly a strand in this breathtaking web. And while some might regard sheep or even salmon as unintelligent creatures, I revere them as the teachers who helped me to know what it is to be one with life.
So I guess I'll just get right into it. I am from imaginary villages and black hands from the basement. I am from cars, Studebakers, and too many magazines of them. I am from a renovated barn in a tiny California town. I am from Seika Boys and rubbing eyebrows. I am from Eyebrow Mama and Lulus and Tutus. No, I am from many acres and old ditches and meadows. From not wanting to sleep and exploring the beautiful, wild, and dangerous woodlands above our property. I am from giant stuffed owls almost as big as me. I am from wildfires and smoke so thick you can't see the sun. I am from moving across the country when I was 6. I am from pirate shows and sweetie number 2s. I am from Grothinmore and sweet, fluffy sheepies. I am from black kitties and a lot of velvet. I am from Skype calls with my grandma and cozying up on the couch watching my mom knit on cold winter nights. I am from pirate lambs. I am from barreling down a snowy hill on a piece of heavily modified plyboard. No, I am from old records and really, really good food. Now, I am from the sting of a baseball hitting the catcher's mitt and the thrill of a bat hitting the ball. I am from the wonderful, amazing world of Tintin. But most of all, I am from Mom and her everlasting love and dedication to me.
two somethings, actually. We got a bunch of stories from first grade Windsor students. And the assignment clearly was write a story about a rock. And I'm just going to pick one that's right here on the top that I like a lot. Unfortunately, I don't see a name for it. So if you're out there, writer of this story, please let us know. Once upon a time, there was a rock named Rocky. He lived in a tree. Rocky did not have any friends. He wished he did. He fell out of his tree and tumbled to the ground. When he fell, he landed in water. He saw many rock friends there. I love a happy ending. You know? Okay, and then one more. I did some writing with children that came to the after-school program at Windsor Library a couple different times, and sometimes we wrote one all together. So any child or adult in the room would call out a line, and in it would go. And this they decided to title "The Tragedies of Mud." Mud is smelly. Mud is messy. Mud is good for making mud cakes. When I get stuck in mud in my wheelchair, I say, I probably shouldn't say what I say. Sometimes I squelch in the mud and my boot gets stuck and my foot comes out. My dog rolls in the mud and gets yelled at. In the car, we say, do you think we'll make it? Step on it. Oops. Rock it back and forth. Good luck. So that's the tragedies of mud. All right. And we are going to close out with Chris Curtis has a song.
So a lot of work went into tonight's program. So we should all be very thankful for Barbara and her staff. So she approached me. Oh, it was in the wintertime when she was brainstorming and putting this all together and wanted to know if I would take part. And I was like, well, Barbara, I'm not much of a storyteller, certainly not an author. I couldn't write a story. And she says, but you write good music, Chris. And I blushed and not really. But I have one song that I think would fit with tonight's Windsor Stories. It's a song entitled I Love Vermont. But there's one verse, the second verse is specifically about Windsor. So I'm going to read to you the second verse the way one reads stories. And then after that, I'll give it to you in context and I'll play it for you. And I'm just going to quickly apologize because wherever I go, I'm always make sure I'm in tune before I get up here. And in all the excitement, I forgot. So this will really take like 30 seconds at most. So just be patient with me. Here we go. Done. Okay. So the second verse of I Love Vermont goes like this. I was born in Windsor, the birthplace of Vermont. But that was just my humble beginning. Right after school, I joined the Navy, and I traveled halfway around the world. And it was a lifestyle that kept my head spinning. We'd sail around from port to port. We'd sail around from port to port. I can find where I left off here. And as our time ashore, it was always short. And then we'd be back out at sea. And as time went by, I soon figured out there's one place I'd rather be. Well, I can't begin to tell you all the places I've been to. Guam, Japan, Australia, just to name a few. But no matter where you go, no matter where you roam, it's just like the old saying says, there's no place like home. I love Vermont. Thank you. So, this is how it sounds with the music attached to it. I hope you enjoy. I'm a bit nervous. Hope I can pull this off. Well, I'd say overall, I'm a pretty happy guy. My glass, it's always half full. Ever optimistic, it's the only way to live. And any other way is just bull. Perhaps it's just my surroundings that make me feel so nonchalant. All of these things around me in my home state of Vermont. Winter and spring, summer and fall, there's always something doing. Things so close, just down the street, no need to go Timbuktuing. Like hiking and biking and my favorite skiing, the Green Mountain State, something for every season. Granola, tree hugger, call me anything you want, just don't call me late for dinner. Yeah, I love Vermont. I love Vermont. No other place I'd rather be. I love Vermont. So pack your bags and come with me. No big city problems like pollution or traffic. Just vistas and sunsets, most all photographic. I love Vermont. Now I was born in Windsor, the birthplace of Vermont, but that was just my humble beginning. And right after school I joined the Nav and traveled halfway around the world, a lifestyle that kept my head spinning. We'd sail around from port to port, our time ashore always short, and then we'd be back out at sea. And as time went by, I soon figured out that there's one place I'd rather be. And I can't begin to tell you all the places that I've been to, like Guam, Japan, or Australia, just to name a few. But no matter where you go to, no matter where you roam, it's just like that old saying says, there's no place like home. I love Vermont. No other place I'd rather be. I love Vermont. So pack your bags and come with me. No big city problems like pollution or traffic. Just vistas and sunsets, most all photographic. I love Vermont. Our history shows when folks get old, no longer willing to fight the cold, they tend to pack their things and head south. But the thought of leaving all I love, the mountain air, its savoir-faire, would leave me feeling down in the mouth. So unless something changes, I'm forced to rearrange things that won't be on that southerly jaunt. 'Cause I'm here to tell, there's no better place to dwell than in my home state of Vermont. Yeah, I love Vermont. I love Vermont. And anything made with maple, I love Vermont. It's our cash crop, our staple. No big city problems like pollution or traffic. Just vistas and sunsets, most are photographic. I love Vermont. Yes, I do. I'm singing. I love Vermont. Now one more time, sing with me. I love Vermont. Yeah, that's our show. Good.
Thank you all so much for coming. That is our show. Thanks for making this a wonderful success. Make sure every family gets a anthology. And yay, read it because there's some amazing stories in there. Thank you so much.